let's informally call this public forum of Aula for the month to order. Everyone, Steve, other than yourself, obviously, I think are up to date on our Aula activities. I was going to mention just 2 items of business. I'll just mention them very briefly. You know, Steve, that working with Michelle, we view Michelle as our customer. We are restarting our tributary near mouth and maybe upstream anyway, a few selected sites sampling project again. It seems to be, it's not yet really underway in that our project manager is, Ken Kudley is, I guess, still struggling to get what should be a pretty informal co-op to everybody's satisfaction. Not his fault, as best I can tell, but that was one thing I was going to mention. And then the other is Peter, Carl Weber, Julie, and maybe Scott and I are starting up again our planning now for treating hemlocks, more hemlocks in the watershed. This will be a parallel planning effort, one being to be sure we're ready to resume treatments this fall. And Julie, that's the purpose of our getting together tomorrow. And then not yet underway, but it needs to pretty soon, is to begin reaching out to other property owners that we would, with their agreement, we would try to survey their property in January, February, March of 2022. And they would then comprise, some subset of them would comprise our spring and fall 2022 treatment program. So all of that is cranking up again after a bit of a summer break. Okay, so Steve, let me see if I can find your introductory text that you so kindly provided us here.
I forgot what I wrote. I hope it's all true.
Well, it's probably no longer true, but when you wrote it a few weeks ago, it may have been. Okay, so here's where I sent you a draft and you said thanks, but this is a slightly edited. So Steve Lynch, our speaker this evening, is the director of the Cayuga County Development and Planning Department of Planning and Economic Development. County Planning and the County Department of Health led the multi-year community collaborative effort that resulted in a now proposed update of the Owasco watershed rules and regs. Steve's going to give us status about that this evening. And then he goes on to say that his office is responsible for the development of the New York State and federal EPA compliant 9-element plan that, when in place, will assess and guide watershed and lake water quality protective actions and aid, we certainly hope, aid in securing public funds to implement those actions. And Steve's going to update us on the status of the 9E activities also. And then the third item in the shopping list for Steve to tell us about is the planned improvements to, upgrades to Emerson Park and the role of his office in that. And I think maybe you've already guided us, or Michelle has already guided us to how we can get more actively involved, but we would appreciate any further insight, Steve, about the what and the when of the Emerson Park changes. So now I promised that I would ask one more thing, Steve. I noticed on the bottom of your, what's it called, salutation, you know, the bottom of emails, it says that in addition to Cayuga County Planning and Economic Development, it says underneath that Cayuga County Development Corporation. For the several of us, could you again explain, please, what a Cayuga County Development Corporation is and what it does?
Sure, Dana. It's just another hat that I wear. The Development Corporation has been in place since 2002. It's a 501c3 corporation, and its primary function is to develop provide financing and certain incentives for civic facilities projects that they're authorized to undertake by their structure. And those would be college dormitories or nursing homes and things along those lines. As another aspect of what the Development Corporation does, we have a approximately $2 million capitalized loan program for small businesses. We have a portfolio right now of 11 loans that we've done, including some of your favorite breweries that you probably have visited. Trying to, work closely with CETA that does the intake on the applications. And we work with our volunteer board of directors to review loans and make loans. And then we manage the loans once they're made. So that's just another aspect that what I'm doing when I'm not working on water quality and land use and whatever else the department is directed to do.
Thank you, Steve. So, and thanks also in advance for your time this evening, for your time in getting ready for this evening, and we'll try to be efficient with your time. One more question, I guess. Generally, the three topics on the agenda for you that you've agreed to speak about tonight. Do you want questions from us after each, or should we accumulate our questions so that you, within a reasonable time, get through all three?
I think you can ask questions whenever you want. If we start, spending too much time on one issue, we won't have time to go over anything. And I'll just share with you that my brief slide deck that I have tonight really focuses briefly on the watershed rules and regulations and then on the 9-element plan. And I don't really have any slides or anything set up for the Emerson Park, but I'm in it every day and working on it every day, so I can answer any questions there are there too.
Okay, well, thank you then. So we'll try not to interrupt you too much, but sometimes just can't wait. So Steve, over to you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to go to this one. And I'll assume you can all see this stunning picture.
Looks good.
Steve, what lake is that?
That's Lake Ontario.
Okay. So I promise I won't interrupt you anymore. So.
That's okay, Dan. You're funny. So an update on the draft regulations, I think, as everybody who's participating in this conversation tonight knows, the draft regulations, after a 3-year period, working with a team of people, really, were brought to the city of Auburn and the town of Owasco as the water purveyors, and they were approved, not unanimously, but 4-to-1 vote for each of those 5-member boards to be transmitted to the New York State Department of Health Bureau of Water Protection. And that's where the review is centered on the state level. And they went to the state in December of 2020. They were forwarded by the county health department, which is called the local health unit in this scenario. And they've had it. And it of course arrived at the New York State Department of Health just at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, when all of the resources were shifting to, how New York State is reacting to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so therefore, there was a reasonable delay in even sort of them even looking at it. They acknowledged receiving it, et cetera, but we really didn't get any feedback shortly after that. So while the state was waiting for this review, I really have to give tremendous credit and to Dana Hall and Aula, and to Adam Effler as the executive director of the Watershed Management Council, to really step up and work on advocating for approval of the watershed regulations at a state level. And Dana can probably address this as much as I can, but that included a letter writing campaign, an advocacy, on the grassroots level to the state, and on a more organizational level to state officials, working with all of our elected officials and then with some of the agencies and organizations. There was a parallel effort to coordinate statewide with non-government organizations and advocacy groups, with strong ongoing collaboration with Hudson River Keepers and other advocacy groups who are really just pushing for seeing this as an opportunity to really lobby strongly for a clear and transparent and approachable process for communities across New York State that either don't have watershed rules or regulations or have outdated watershed rules and regulations and want to protect them, especially in situations where the people that are drinking the water from these watersheds, from these water bodies, are not in the watershed themselves and don't have any control over the land use in those watershed areas. So that's an ongoing process that's been going on. We did a couple of webinars on the importance of watershed rules and regulations, really spurred on by Hudson River Keepers and their staff, who really have a lot more expertise on this advocacy level than I did. And yeah, I can't speak for Adam Effler and Dana. And then the next stage outreach that we're talking about right now, that's probably pretty much just from this week, is continued advocacy and support in reaching out to the municipalities from the Owasco water drinking source that don't live in the watershed. So beyond Auburn and the town of Owasco, to Fleming and Senate and Troop and Aurelius and Port Byron and Mentz and all of these communities that are drinking the water, to see if we could get their support evidenced either in resolutions or in letters of support. So that's what's going on while the state is sort of, I won't say on a pause, but they're not really reviewing it. So Eileen O'Connor has been sending probably every 2 weeks an email to her contacts at the Department of Health at the state level saying, have you made any progress in our reviews, et cetera. And so the latest request and inquiry from Eileen O'Connor at the Health Department was met with an email from her colleague that said, here is what upper management has officially drafted as a response to anybody who's asking about the watershed rules and regulations. And of course, I'm paraphrasing, what they said in a very prepared statement, but it's basically, these are the points. That New York State Department of Health shares support for comprehensive water quality protections in the lake and the watershed, that they're committed to a science-based drinking water protection approach that builds consensus among state authorities, meaning the New York State DEC, Ag and Markets, Department of State, and so on. And towards that end, they've convened a 4-agency work group, that's what they call it, a work group, to evaluate the proposed amendments to the 1984 rules. And that, of course, is New York State Department of Health, of course, but Ag and Markets, which was expected, New York State DEC, and New York State Department of State, those agencies were also expected. I didn't know personally if some legal arm of the state government would also be part of that review, but this looks like the 4 heavies that are going to be getting together and looking at the proposed rules and regulations. They go on to say in the prepared statement that the agency's work group's evaluation will be loosely quoted, informed by previous and ongoing studies and implementation of state and federally funded water quality improvement and drinking water protection programs. And what they're speaking of generally is the 9-element plan and the new drinking water source protection plan, which is a rolled out program that the state just did last year. I think they did it in 2020 and they announced it in May of 2021. And so they said that the timing of their review is going to be merged with progress and recommendations coming out of these two items. And in addition to these, they're going to take into consideration the science-based recommendations from the work groups and from the work that's being ongoing and developed by the DEC and by Ag and Markets, probably the Water Quality Improvement Program, the WQIP, and certainly New York State DEC's hub, Finger Lakes Water Hub work and research there. So that came out on Monday, on the 2nd. That was when, there was emails shared amongst us and some of our partners in this advocacy effort. Different people interpreting this different ways. I tend to be pessimistic about it myself, but I don't want to color anybody's own judgment of what they were trying to say very tactfully in that prepared response from the state. We shall see. But because they are talking about trying to link their review and their recommendations on the amendments to the 9-element plan and I'm sure the drinking water source water protection plan, the drinking water source protection plan. I'm sorry. That I give you an update, at least on the 9-element plan, and there hasn't been much except an award letter on the drinking water source protection plan, which the city of Auburn applied for and was awarded. I think they awarded 40 something across the state. And I can tell you a little bit about that in a minute, but let me get on to the 9-element plan.
Steve, before you do so,
Sure.
what I tried to put on my rosy glasses when I read that letter on that response on Monday, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked the phrase science-based. I thought that gave us, or at least I interpreted that as a positive indication of proactive thinking. Maybe I didn't say that very well, but anyway, I hung my perspective on science-based. What do you think?
Well, I know that when the New York State Farm Bureau, provided and testified with a written statement at the joint City of Auburn, Town of Owasco meeting, when the town and the city approved these for distribution to the state, one of the points they made was that this is not science-based, that this was not based on science. And Partners for Healthy Watersheds spokesperson, this marketing person that they have on their team, stated very boldly that none of this is based on science. And I take issue with that, because really most of what we have in the rules and regulations are based on broadly accepted science, maybe more generalized in the form of rules and regulations and less specific to a particular sub-watershed or a watershed area. But generally, the NRCS recommendations for buffers, the NRCS recommendations for not applying manure on snow-covered or frozen saturated ground. And so if it's science-based general and they want to make it science-based specific to Owasco Lake, I think it gives them a very broad brush to either support what the amendments are being proposed or to pick them apart. So we shall see, I think, Dana. I hope that's not pessimistic, but that's my sort of pragmatic look at it.
Yeah. Thanks for that reminder back on the approval hearing. I had forgotten that context about not science-based. Yep. Thank you, Steve.
Steve and Dana, I believe Carol has a question.
Sure.
Yeah. Here, let me put my.
And I see it says Ken Kudla has entered the waiting room, if anyone else sees that.
Yep, I just let him in.
Okay. Sorry.
Thanks.
Back on the general kind of discussion of the rules and regulations, I know, and I'm pretty new at this, so it might just be a normal thing, but I saw a couple articles in the paper about a resolution that was just recently signed and sent, kind of encouraging the DEC to continue their review from the city council, Auburn City Council, and maybe Owasco, town of
Uh,
Owasco. And
yeah,
I wondered if something, if that was done for some reason, or was it just done because it's been 6 months, or was there something encouraging that, or something negative we had heard that precipitated it?
I think it's a combination of things, Carol. I think it first and foremost is because it's been some time and they're anxious to keep the heat on, so to speak, to make sure that Albany knows that the water purveyors are watching this. And I think if there was any other trigger that might have happened was Dana and Adam were successful in getting support letters from New York State Senator Hemling and Assemblyman Lamondez and Assemblyman Oberacker. Well, Lamondez and Hemling wrote letters, and then Oberacker tried to prepare a joint letter that seemingly backtracked on the support for the resolution, citing concerns about agriculture. And Senator Helming and Assemblyman Lamondez, who is also a farmer, signed on to that letter from Oberacker, which seemed like a step back from support and contradicted maybe the earlier support letters. And Adam Effler has been almost to the point of being strident with them, which is a tricky thing to do in some ways when you rely on state funding for a lot of your grants and things like that. But he has been forthright with them about asking them to sort of, I don't know, withdraw that letter and revise their statements. And the city of Auburn and the town of Owasco elected leadership was aware of that letter and how the advocacy group here took it. And I mean, they were ready to go public and like kind of call it out in the press. And I think they're trying to work it out without doing that right off the bat.
So Steve, without giving away any secrets or whatever, things that you don't want out publicly, but that discussion of modifying, withdrawing that letter is ongoing. It's not forgotten.
I think Adam Effler has taken the lead on that as the executive director of the management council. And the person that was really sort of, as you know, Dana, sort of leading up, contacting the senators and the assembly people in the first instance to get those letters. I don't think he's given up on it, but the response hasn't happened yet. So we're at.
Steve, Rick Nelson, what is, in this case, the Farm Bureau, how do they define science-based, or what science sources are they going to use versus what they say is not in the rules and regs?
Well, they didn't share that information when they made their comments. They basically just, they were really urging them not to vote on it that evening and to go back to the drawing table. And, there were compromises all along on the watershed rules and regulations. I'm sure there are many individuals that wanted them to be more strict. And there were probably many individuals that wanted them, maybe in certain stakeholder groups that, wanted them to be less regulatory. So I believe they really were just trying to delay these kind of regulations that call for buffers and, calling roadside ditches, water conveyance, features and things like that, requiring farm plans for all farms of a certain size. you know, not the CAFO nutrient management plans that you see in the 3-ring binders, but some form of farm planning, you know, about nutrient management, manure placement, things like that for all farms. And that, you know, they don't really, I don't think they wanted to see that level of regulatory structure put in place, and they were going to advocate against it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the state has said they want to merge some of their recommendations coming on the amendments with the watershed management plan, and especially the EPA 9 elements plan. And so what I'll say is the watershed management plan, which is actually called the watershed, there we go, which is actually called the watershed management and waterfront revitalization plan. It was already prepared. This particular 9E element of it, which will be amended to it, we got the EPA grant from the Department of State. The watershed plan that was finished in 2016, one of the major items in that plan was to say you should prepare a 9-element plan. And it was clear that it said you should prepare a 9-element plan and not a total maximum daily load, or TMDL plan, such as they have done on Cayuga Lake, that they wanted a 9-element plan. And that's because a 9-element plan is more focused on non-point source pollution, and a TMDL is more focused on point source solutions, such as a wastewater treatment facility or the former fish production area that was down in Dryden for some time that was pouring phosphorus into the inlet. So that's where the funding comes from. Michelle Wunderlich, who you all know, I think, who's our associate planner, which is one of our top level planning positions. She's the project lead, and she's working very closely with the consultants, Ecologic LLC, which I have to really give Ecologic and Liz Moran tremendous credit. They probably spent all of their money on this grant 3 years ago, and they're still just plugging away and not complaining about it or asking for more money. And by the way, I think our total budget for this plan was like $75,000, and how and all the power to Skinny Atlas Lake Association. This is not to take away from them at all, but I think their plan was going to cost $350,000 or something like that. But anyway, it's Ecologic, the Cornell University Department of Biological and Environmental Engineering, and the New York State Water Resources Institute. And those are the folks, the later two are the ones that are working on the model mostly. So waterfront revitalization plan, as I said, points to anybody who knows exactly where this spot is. Actually, I don't. Was completed in March 2016 and approved by the Department of State. And one of the biggest recommendations was do the 9-element plan. And so we went out and we looked for the grant to implement that recommendation. So here are the 9 elements. There's 2 bolded components to this, and those because that's partially what we're really trying to focus a lot on. One is identifying quantity, where the pollution and the nutrients are coming from in the watershed. And I know that ALA is rightly very, very interested in that, because if you don't know where it's coming from, you can't do anything about it. And that's in the watershed based on sub-watershed areas as well. Identify water quality goals and pollutant reductions needed to achieve those goals, and that's part of the modeling. Identify best management practices that are needed to reach those reduction goals. To describe the necessary financial and technical assistance you need to implement whatever you need to employ those best management practices or those mitigations. Describe a stakeholder engagement in planning and implementation. Estimate a schedule to implement the BMPs. And of course, that's going to depend on resources and money and staffing. Describe schedule and milestones for BMP implementation. identify criteria for assessing water quality improvements. Again, that's going to point back to the model, and describe the monitoring plan to track water quality improvement going forward. And what I will say about this project is it's really, it'll start with a plan, but it needs to be a living document. It needs to be something that is used as an ongoing tool to identify, quantify, assess, and monitor and shift strategies as needed to address water quality. The objectives of the watershed model, which is part of the plan, here's 3 main objectives. Capture site-specific data and knowledge about what's going on the land in the watershed by sub-watershed regions. Estimate the nutrient loading from specific practices and locations, whether that's ag or it's other land use activities that dominate the landscape. And provide a tool to test management what-if scenarios. And that's pretty key, as I think you all understand. So in order to construct a model that's going to be useful, we need data, and we need good data. And this has been one of the things that is really, amongst many, there's been a lot of delays in the development of the model, and really all the delays in the development of the 9-element plan can be traced back to the development of the model. And part of that challenge, or one of those challenges, has been getting data that the DEC says they will allow us to use in the model. DEC has to approve the 9-element plan. The Department of State is funding it so that they've got their hands on the purse strings and, timelines and grant extensions and things like that. But ultimately, the DEC is going to be the state agency that's going to review the 9-element plan. And of course, and rightly so in many, many ways, and I think you all would agree with this, whether it's easy to do a QUAP or not, that certified labs are probably the best bet in getting good data and getting data that you could rely on to inform the model, especially if you're going to end up making any kind of policy decision. You want to base that policy decision on qualified and correct data. So to collect site-specific data and information, to sample it over a range of conditions, whether that's land use, land cover, practices, weather conditions, and use that data to populate a model. So the selected model that we're using is called the Soil Water Assessment Tool, the SWAT tool. I think most of the people on this call, or a number of people on this call, were present when I think Nick Colas might have done sort of a SWAT model 101 to sort of introduce what's being done here. The SWAT model was initially developed by USDA, Agricultural Research Service, and Texas A&M University. It's being deployed in most 9-element plans and in many TMDL projects. It simulates dissolved and particulate phosphorus and various nitrogen fractions. It's meant to be adaptable to the conditions on the ground. And so, all the data about soils and soil types and slope and all of those things are all part of the computer model. And it's supposed to allow flexible management input, which is key. So that in the future we could say, well, the data is leading us here, so now we want to explore this other scenario. So let's go out and make sure we have the data to support that. The 9-element plan obviously has to start with a basis of a plan. So, and there's a finite amount of time in which to develop this model, develop the 9-element plan, and then use that as a springboard from which to continue data collection, data analysis, scenario assessment, and so on. So when the team that's working with Ecologic, et cetera, decided to use a certain set of data and a certain mitigation measures to look at, it's a starting point, I guess is what I'm trying to relay. The progress that we've had to date, the Cornell team, the model has been calibrated. The model's been tested and verified. DEC has said they're good with it now. And right now they're taking that and they're working on model projections, scenario testing and recommended actions in consultation with the Wasco Lake Watershed Advisory Committee. Cornell's team's deadline to come up with those scenario assessments is August 25th, because we're trying to get ready for a September rollout of some initial plan recommendations. The modeling scenarios on the table right now, and again, this is a starting point, basically looks at agricultural practices. They're looking at what would happen if we just were able to implement a 10% reduction in elemental nitrogen and elemental phosphorus application on acres to be captured under nutrient management plans. What would happen if there was no manure or fertilizer applied within riparian buffers? What would happen if we expanded the use of cover crops by certain percentages? What would happen if we expanded use of reduced tillage practices in certain areas or to a certain extent? And what would happen if there was no application of manure or inorganic fertilizer within the watershed? And I don't know what boundary case means in there, but it might mean a particular sub-watershed or something like that. Michelle could probably answer that question if she wasn't on vacation somewhere right now. The project timetable that we have right now, so August and September, work with the partners in the Watershed Advisory Committee on watershed management recommendations to achieve goals and objectives of, mitigation measures. And confer with the Upstate Freshwater Institute and the DEC to integrate the lake water quality model projections. This model, the SWAT model, is a land-based model on the watershed land. UFI and DEC are looking to try to develop a lake model where they'll be able to model certain changes in the lake, I guess, relative to what's happening on the land. September 27th is our target date for a public meeting on the results of the modeling and the draft recommendations. I believe we're going to have it at BOCES. I'm fairly sure of that. The challenge with that, of course, is that in person with the COVID coming back and everything, we might be limited to 50 people. We're actually doing a planning board training there August 18th on solar and wind regulation, and we can only have 50 participants. But I believe we will be able to, have a live Zoom session and have people participate virtually in that meeting. So the August and September, some recommendations are made. They're circulated. I'm not sure what the process will be for circulation. I'm sure we'll work with ALA's leadership to get the information out to the ALA's constituents and stakeholders. And then we'll have this public meeting to say, here's the initial recommendations on the 9E plan. Here's a little bit about the model. This is what it's saying right now. And then we'll get feedback on that and finalize the implementation strategy and schedule and tracking and monitoring section. And then we'll issue a draft plan in October. And then late October, early November, we'll hold a third public meeting on the draft plan. That comes out of the work from August through October. And depending on what the feedback is on the draft plan in late October, early November, we may in November or in December have the final edits and submit the plan to the Department of State and the DEC for their review and consideration. And that's what I have as far as slides go, ladies and gentlemen.
Steve, could I ask you to back up to the just preceding slide?
Certainly. There you go.
So what's the nature of the recommendations that we will see in the plan? And let me pose what I think the answer is. So the SWAT model is faithfully reproducing the data results that were found in the watershed over recent years, and it's calibrated and verified and reproducing that scenario or those scenarios. In addition, now it's being exercised against some other what ifs, these scenarios that you talked about. And so will these scenarios be then, will the results from that modeling of these scenarios then be the recommendations that are in this first version of the plan? And that'll be what we collectively go after funding to implement? What will be the recommendations in the plan?
Well, let's back up just a little bit. The first step in the process is to draft some initial recommendations. So they're going to be based on what's on my screen right now, on your screen that you're looking at, these modeling scenarios. So these are the things that are being tested by this modeling team right now.
Okay.
And the outcome of that assessment will be a set of recommendations. You know, it might not be 10% reduction. It might be more, it might be less. It might be, you know, here's what would happen if this happened with cover crops or reduced tillage, et cetera. And whether or not they come out and become recommendations is going to be part of the work that the partners in the Watershed Advisory Committee, which is the Wasco Watershed Management Council membership, and I believe there's AWLA folks on the advisory committee, or at least a representative, I believe.
Yes. Yes.
Will be part of what comes out at the public meeting. Now, that's a public meeting. That's like, okay, so this is going to take some education at the beginning of a meeting, I'm sure, to say, you know, this is what the model is, and this is how it works, and this is the work that's been done, and so on and so forth. And here's what we have learned from running these scenarios. And here's some recommendations that have come out of those draft recommendations. And then depending on the feedback that comes from that process, we will finalize the implementation strategy and the schedule and the tracking and monitoring section and incorporate those into a draft plan. So the first part in September is a set of recommendations, which is part of the draft plan, but it's not the whole draft plan. And then so in October, the draft plan will get issued. There'll be a public meeting on the draft plan. And then depending on the feedback on that, a final plan will be submitted to the DEC. My takeaway personally on this, and I have not run the model. I'm not a computer modeling person. I rely on consultants and my more trained staff than I am to do those things. But I look at this as the start of a tool. And I like to think of the 9-element plan and the tools that are coming out of this as, well, a toolbox that will drive ongoing recommendations. Now, whether or not you end up amending the plan every time you take a different direction, I think those are two different things. The plan might have a certain set of recommendations that might take a number of, a certain amount of time to get the resources and the funding to implement, and the buy-in from landowners and the people that are doing land use. While that's happening, it doesn't stop people from using the SWOT model and the lake model in conjunction with the SWOT model to explore further mitigations, further changes, further recommendations that don't necessarily even have to be brought, amended into the 9E plan, depending on what they are. Maybe at that point, it'll make sense to do that, but I look at it as an early tool, I guess, to say.
Yep. And so just to, if I could belabor this a little bit. So this set of initial recommendations, they get encapsulated in the plan that, let's assume, gets approved at the state level. The explicit notion to all of us in the public is if we invest money to implement these recommendations, the quality, the longevity of our lake will be improved by some quantified amount. I mean, what's the proof of the pudding? You know, in 5 years, folks, these recommendations would, if implemented, would result in a, making this up, I don't know, 50% reduction in the number of HABs we see, you know, or some target like that, implied or explicit promise, so to speak.
What I would say is the goal is to say, if you do these particular recommendations, the science and the modeling is telling us they will have this kind of reduction in nutrient loading in the lake. And if you follow the science and you stick to that assumption that nutrient loading equals poor water quality and contributes to the HAB problem, might be contributing to quagga mussel growth, might be contributing to any other item that creates poor water quality, then I would say that would be the measure. It would be, okay. And it might be, the other thing about the 9-element plan and the fact that it's based on a watershed-wide model where the watershed is broken into sub-watersheds, it allows you to even, you know, maybe not pinpoint parcel by parcel per se, but generally pinpoint by sub-watershed where the best bang for your buck is, both from a point of view of the land use in that sub-watershed and what the model says about what the bang for your buck is by doing this or that mitigation in that sub-watershed. And of course, some of those sub-watersheds might be the ones that are attached to these tributaries that are carrying the most nutrients into the lake.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I don't want to monopolize the question, so I'll be silent, but then I have at least one more after when there's another window here.
Certainly. And I don't know whether I should minimize or stop sharing, but people might have questions about one of the slides, so.
Everybody, are there questions in addition to these annoying ones that I'm asking?
Steve, this is Ann Robson, and your picture there of the Martin Farm on Ensenor is gorgeous, but this is a non-conforming land use within our water conservation overlay district of our town zoning. And is there anything at a municipal level or even, you know, in the county that we can curtail certain applications or land uses because of this non-conforming farm? I mean, we have to work with this, but is there anything, because right now we're also redoing our zoning to, and Carrie, I have to put in a good word for Carrie because she's been amazing and a great help for us. But is there anything that we can do to strengthen a little bit more because of this exact situation? I mean, it's beautiful, but it is a big concern right there.
Hello, Ann. Thank you. That's the second positive feedback I've had on Carrie today.
Oh, well, then please note it. She is tremendous.
I really don't want to speak specifically to the Martin Farm because I'm not familiar right at this moment with exactly non-conforming, how it is and so on. But one of the things that constrains with regard to agriculture, that is, in Cayuga County, is that probably over 90% of the parcels in Cayuga County, not just around Owasco Lake, but going all the way up into Victory and Sterling, et cetera, are in the consolidated agricultural district, which is not a zoning district. It's a state It's an established agricultural district, which gives right to farm. You've seen a lot of these little signs that come into your community and others that says, we're a right to farm town. And the determination of whether the imposition of local land use law by a town board or a village board, probably town, because most of the villages don't have too much ag in them, have to not be a burden to the farmer if it's typical farmer practice. Now, I'm not speaking specifically to the Martin Farm and what their practices are and how they are, but hopefully the watershed rules and regulations will address this. And the Martin Farm is not a CAFO, I don't believe, right? And so being a smaller farm, there's much less regulatory oversight. They might not agree with that, but there's much less regulatory oversight on them than, say, the larger farms, which have to comply in many, many other ways. I guess to answer your question is, on the Martin Farm particularly, I'd have to take a look at specifically your overlay zone and your ordinance and maybe give you a more informed answer there, Ann. But with regard to overall agriculture within the county ag district is a right to farm law, which, it's not a bad thing necessarily, but it puts the power more in ag and markets than it does at the localities with regard to farming practice.
Thanks, that helped.
Steve, this is Peter Rogers. Could you talk a little bit more about the right to farm law? I've seen the signs, but I'm not familiar with what it actually does.
Yeah, it refers to state ag and markets law. I don't have the citation off the top of my head, so I won't give it to you. It's 23 AA or something like that. It's a state law that says that if you are in an agricultural district, and again, don't get that confused with like, I'm in a town and I'm in the ag residential zone, which most of the towns, some of them, the whole town is an ag residential zone. That's a zoning district. This is the state certified agricultural district in Cuyahoga County. There used to be 5 of them, and they had to be updated every 8 years, and they were rotating. And so we consolidated them all, did a lot of work to consolidate them into one district. It didn't change the number of parcels in it or anything. It was still the same amount of ag district in Cuyahoga County. It just was under one ag district that we can deal with as one entity. But in any case, Peter, it points to state ag law that basically says if you are doing farming, it defines farming and goes across, of course, animals and crops and things like that, but also silviculture and grape growing and all other kinds of agricultural practices. If you were doing those practices and you're not doing, and of course, there's lots of flexibility that the state has given themselves at ag and markets level, what's considered normal practices for farming, localities have to, when they're building roads and they're adopting ordinances, they have to make sure that they're not becoming overly burdensome to those normal practices of agriculture. And if a farmer thinks that a law is burdening their normal agricultural practices as the state sees it, they can go to the state and ask for a determination, and the state ag and markets will make a determination about whether or not they have the right to do that, basically.
Okay.
Sorry to give you such a long answer, Peter.
No, excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay.
This is
Hey,
Carol. Oh,
Go ahead, Carol.
okay. This is a real quick question. This is Carol Supkis again. Thanks for doing this. This was really helpful. Going all the way back to the beginning on the rules and regulations, when DEC does its review, do they have to do any public meetings before or after they've made their decision? Is that at all a public process or? Do they have workshops, anything like that?
Hi, Carol. No, they don't. The review is technically by the New York State Department of Health, Bureau of Water Protection.
Right, I misspoke,
And
sorry.
what they have done is which is typical of any state level review, they're mandated by their own internal rules of procedure and so on that
Right.
establishes the agencies to say, I got to coordinate with Ag and Markets, and I have to coordinate with the Department of State, and I have to coordinate with DEC. There's probably nothing that says that those meetings have to be public other than, open meetings law probably will say, like, if you really wanted to drive to Albany and find out where they were meeting, you probably can sit in, but it doesn't require them to let you participate. And that's just my guess on open meetings law, Carol. But one of the things I should let you know is when this Monday, when Eileen O'Connor received this, well-prepared response that this is how we're approaching the review, more or less laid it out, which is more information than we've had in the past in a concrete way. It was circulated to Dana and to our team at the Watershed Management Council. Eileen O'Connor, myself was on that, and we were shared with City of Auburn and Town of Owasco officials. And right off the bat, the City of Auburn and Town of Owasco officials said, well, if they're going to have a transparent and open review process, I think that we should have somebody from the Owasco Watershed Management Council, like Adam Effler, who has a science background and a PhD. He should be part of that review. And I think they might try to work on resolutions or a letter or some form of
Did he go? Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, we lost Steve.
Uh-oh.
Steve, what happened?
I'm so sorry.
Steve said more than he should have.
Yeah,
Boy, so that's on his end, pretty sure. He just dropped his connection.
Can he tell that he's been dropped, or do we need to call and?
I would think you'd be able to tell, but do you have his number handy?
I
I don't have his number.
presumably do. Let's see.
I just have a work email.
He didn't even freeze, he just vanished in mid-syllable, didn't he?
yeah.
It's like somebody unplugged his computer and his internet all at once.
Yeah, and I wonder where that somebody was from.
What agency?
Delete!
Wow.
I guess I don't have his number handy. Well, let's see. Let's see where this number goes. Hey, Steve, this is Dana. We were asking ourselves on the video conference if you realized that your connection disappeared in mid-sentence, mid-syllable. And so we're still connected, hoping that you're endeavoring to get back in. We're enjoying your conversation. Thank you. That went into his voicemail, obviously, so.
And which number was that? Was that 1276? Last four digits?
1482, which I think is his mobile number. 1482.
1276 is the generic county planning office.
Planning, okay.
Yep. But if his home internet dropped, maybe his,
That's true.
his Wi-Fi, his phone receiving.
Does anyone know, like, if they have to put out a draft decision that then gets a comment period or anything, or do they just issue their decision and that's it?
They being the state?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, on the one hand, I would think that they would, should, and would be required, but on the other hand, that links it, that adds yet more time, maybe results in yet another cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So is the way of thinking of this is that this is our plan for taking care of the watershed in a better manner than we have in the past. All spelled out, science-based, we're gonna do all this, and these rules and regs are the way we're gonna make sure that this happens. Is that?
That's what I was trying to question. I don't, these, several scenarios that were run, if those results, if those are implemented and how much each will cost or whatever, but if those were implemented, is the public being promised, maybe with a small p, that as a result of that investment of all of our money, the lake quality, the longevity, the other, you know, that we'll be able to see the difference?
And it may just be that all they can say is less nutrients will be loaded into the system, but how the system reacts might not be something that they can promise. I know that was sort of the way we had it with air quality, is you could reduce how much was being emitted, but you know, we're always tweaking how that, if, you know, a lot of times it doesn't reduce the air, make the air quality better that you thought it was going to do, you know, or something. Like that.
Yeah, Carol, that's a very good point. And in fact, in this case, that maybe is a role for the still under development lake model.
Lake model then does the chemistry of what happens in the water.
And even then, what the lake model predicts isn't, for whatever reasons, isn't what results.
Yeah, because you always have to go back and say, did that happen? Did that happen? You know, and keep refining it. But
If I've got a enough to be dangerous understanding of models, because I bumped up against it in a past life. Land-based predictive modeling, we used to do it. If they've broken that down into sub watersheds, if it's a fine enough sub watershed, then there may be a primary stream through the sub watershed that dumps into the lake. So then, in theory, and this is a big if, I'm sort of guessing here, the John Halfmans of the world could potentially sample in the lake where that stream dumps, and he may be actually measure reduction in the nutrients.
Yep.
I just laid out like 4 ifs there because I don't fully
Or a farm with 1,171 heifers and 1,500 adult dairy cows creates a lagoon that's 50 feet wide by 8 feet deep, and then 2 inches of that surface area goes flying down a creek over the course of 48 hours during a rain event, and then is visibly seen going into the lake. They can say, well, X number of cows times this blah, 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 and this manure, blah, 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 concentration at this amount of time, and this, you know, blah, 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 rate times time equals distance. I don't know. Increased phosphorus by 12% in this portion of Cuba Lake.
Yeah, measuring things in the lake though gets tricky. And that lake model, I'd be real interested in what that's going to entail.
Yeah, that's going to be really.
Hey, Steve. Fancy meeting you here.
So my computer just says, computer is shutting down, installing updates.
Oh, no.
Outstanding.
Thanks, Windows.
That happens to my brain a lot. Yeah.
Oh, right. And so I don't have
Steve,
Dana. I don't have your cell phone number. I don't have Dave Carr's cell phone number. I don't have Peter Rogers' cell phone number. I sent an email to Dana and Peter in the, you know, going, you know, in the subject line. So sorry about that, Carol. I was answering your question.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a process.
Okay. That was my question, was like, just real quick, was, do they have to put out a draft decision and then get public comment, or they just get to decide?
I think they generally get to decide. I think,
All right.
I think what will happen is they will make some sort of a decision. That decision, I don't believe, would be throw away and start over. I think it might be, we don't think that this recommendation and this recommendation we don't support, or you need to change or adopt them without it, et cetera. At any point, they will give that decision theoretically back to the county health department, who will transmit that to the water purveyors, the town of Owasco and the city of Auburn. And the same goes with if they say, we think these are the best watershed rules and regulations we've ever seen, and we want you to adopt them, it still goes back through the health department to the city and the town. And then the city of the town would go through the adoption process, and they essentially become local laws.
So theirs is almost a comment period, or
It's a review period.
it's a review period. So can we, but we cannot ignore, you can't ignore their review.
No, they could say you can't adopt these.
Okay. All right.
The state has the approval authority.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
Steve, you
so-
just,
go ahead,
Steve, you
go ahead.
just said city and town of Auburn and Owasco. So is it, can it also be a county standpoint or a watershed?
No,
So it's just
No.
those two areas, if you will.
it is for whoever is selling the water from the lake is a water purveyor, and they have the responsibility under the state statutes to protect that water supply
This,
and to inspect it and so on.
Okay.
So that gives them the authority, which is, if you think about it, it's one of the only mechanisms in the state law that allows one municipality to say what can happen in another municipality. And so because I think the last update to any watershed rules and regulations might have been Skinny Atlas, and I think that might have been about 15, 20 years ago. I'm not sure. Dana, maybe you know.
Yeah, I think that's right, Steve. It's been quite a while.
But, you know, with all of the HABs and all the pressure on the Finger Lakes and they are very aware that everybody is looking at these particular proposed regulations. And therefore, at a state level, they are understandably very careful about what they're going to approve, because if they approve it for Owasco Lake, they will have a really hard time not approving something very similar or the same for any of the other water bodies that are being used as water sources in the state.
And Steve, the opposite would be true also. If they don't approve for Owasco, how do you explain, you know, what clearly is happening to this lake and therefore to other lakes also? And I mean, isn't it true they're caught between a rock and a hard place, or some bad analogy?
Well, they're probably not happy that we're trying to adopt the watershed rules and regulations. You know, when we first started, Commissioner Ball had some real sort of derogatory, he's the Commissioner of Ag and Markets. He had some kind of derogatory statements that he made at a conference, and the paper learned about it and called him out on it. And the localities and the county called him out on it. And he kind of did a mea culpa and came to the county and have a meeting and brought his staff. And we explained, look, you know, we're embarking on a very transparent, collaborative process here. We're not, you know, we're trying to get all the stakeholders involved, and he acquiesced to that. But at that meeting were the then heads of the Department of Health, Bureau of Water Protection. It has changed since then, but those older school state Department of Health employees, they kind of, Eileen and I pulled them aside and said, we want your advice. There's nothing in the regulations that say how long your review should take, what exactly we're supposed to be providing you with, what process we're supposed to do to get public input and so on. And they didn't have any advice. Their advice was basically, well, Canandaigua tried it, and then I think it was Canandaigua, and they tried it for 5 years, and those didn't get approved. So we suggest you just rely on, you know, DEC and EPA, you know, on the state and federal level, and there's plenty of regulations in place. And we really didn't like that answer. So what we said, well, you know, we're gonna design a process that you can't really argue with. Well, we hope to do that. We'll see, right? So anyway, sorry about the long answer. I
Hey,
get
Steve,
worked up about these things.
Yep, it's hard not to, Steve. We don't want to overstay our welcome, or have we dented your evening as much as you will permit us?
Thank you. I'm happy to answer any more questions you have. The only thing on my agenda is putting on sneakers and walking the dog.
Well, me as well. I wanted to ask, are we one of the first, or perhaps even the first in the state to soon be submitting our 9E plan? Or are we benefiting from others who have broken the ground ahead of us?
I think we're one of the first, and that has been a little bit of a challenge with the model. You know, creating the model, because, you know, we had a lot of data, but it wasn't certified lab data, because as you know, for years and years, we've been having Dr. Halfman, and his work is excellent, and I would stand by his work, but they wanted certified lab work, and they didn't want it being done by graduate students and so on. So we had 10 years of data, and we thought we were all ready to do that model. And they said, no, you have to get new data from certified labs. And that's been, you know, a little bit of a challenge. And then COVID was a challenge, because the people at Cornell, when they couldn't get into the supercomputer, things that when they were running scenarios that would normally take them an hour was taking, you know, 48 hours on their home computers.
Okay, so we may be one of the first, if not the first, when they get our proposed 9E plan in their electronic or paper mailboxes.
Yeah, other people are close behind us.
Steve,
As you know. Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
just curious, as the 9E plans begin to appear, you know, more and more across the state, if you will, are a lot of them going to have modeling components in them?
I think almost all of them will have modeling components. I think
That's
O'Brien and Gear is working on a number of them with their scientists on the models.
Cool. That's very interesting.
And the other thing is, you know, listen, I love academia, and I think you do too, Dave, but you know, when you're really not paying for people to do the model, and you're paying PhD students and post-grads to do it, it's hard to demand, like, I need it. You know, when you're paying an engineering company to do it,
yeah,
there's deadlines. So that's been a challenge too.
I don't want to get too far down this road, but I'm the geek in the group here, but are you guys at the planning department going to end up with a model in your hand, so to speak, on your computers to run in the future?
Yes.
I mean, this is an amazing resource you've got now, or going to have.
Yes, and I can say that we're willing to share it. As long as I'm planning director, I'm willing to share it with anybody that knows how to use it and can use it. And I'm willing to share data with anybody. And that's coming from somebody that doesn't know how to even use the model. So
yeah, that's
I'm assuming other people could use it.
Okay.
In fact, Steve and Dave, I think Nick Colas and Greg Colucci have the most recent snapshot of the SWAP model right now.
Okay.
They do. And just for the record, it's Greg Hutnick. He recently got married.
Oh, jeepers, I just got used to Colucci. Okay, so Hutnick now, huh? Okay.
I'm watching the clock, and I don't want to throw us a completely different road, but Steve, I did want to thank you for being here tonight, and a subject near and dear to my heart. And what I hope Aula can be is turning toward the people end of the relationship with lakes, our lake, our beautiful lake, and the park that abuts the lake on the north end and is one of the only places where the public has access to that lake. And I've been very interested in following the master plan progression, which has, is in the, the thought process maybe more at the moment. But what I wanted to respectfully ask you is, when I attended an informational session, and it was at least 2 years ago, I think maybe longer now. I heard excitement, creativity, how to get more people to come to the park, how to make it more usable for wider groups. Let's have lightweight chairs and picnic tables that can be moved. Let's do this. Let's have a theater, you know, amphitheater. Let's so and so and so and so. But I didn't hear much about the lake. And the reason people want to come to that beautiful place is because there's a lake there, right? That's it. That's the reason. So I was just wondering what role we could play to help keep that at the center of the heart of everything that gets done in that plan. And I was just letting my mind kind of go, and anything from, if you have food trucks, what kind of flatware are they selling? Is it all recyclable? Is there a creative way to encourage people to throw garbage out with artistic garbage receptacles? I've seen crazy things on beaches that are big woven garbage cans with like a fish with a big open mouth, and kids will run up and, you know, just do people, is there signage? Not much signage because you want it to be fun, but to have any understanding of how water moves over or through the park, which is actually, we know where all the wet spots are because we walk through it constantly. So we know the water table is really high over a pretty large area of that park. You could go on and on. Rain barrels, rain gardens, semi-permeable pavement, just many, many ways from the small to the big that you could be putting that, inserting that message that this is a special place, this beautiful lake is here, and it's a reciprocal relationship. And is there gratitude expressed through the way the park rests against that lake and people come there? So I would love to see some way that we could be helpful in keeping that part of the conversation going.
Those are all great ideas, and I would say that the master plan has mentioned that, you know, that should be a theme that runs through the park to the extent that it can provide demonstration and encouragement and understanding and education about watershed issues and so on and so forth. At this point, you know, we've done a plan for Deauville Island, but it's conceptual. It's like, okay, the amphitheater should go here and the playground should go here. We're going to move the bathrooms from here to here and have a concession area and so on. And the pathways will go here and here. And it's just conceptual at this point. When you get down to, okay, now we have the money to build something. Okay, and to that end, the legislature has set aside $1 million, which is, I hate to say it, it's only very partial of what it would cost. But I'm very grateful that they've done that, and I'm encouraged. But once we get down to designing things, that's when those kind of conversations, you need to hold our feet to the fire, you know, respectfully and nicely, like you just did. But you know, so that we can do things. Now, will we be able to do permeable pavement? Probably with that high water table, maybe not. But maybe what we can do is certain rain gardens and demonstration areas and so on. I know that there is a group, I think with Aula, that is working to do some demonstration rain gardens. But what we just want to make sure we do is, like, don't do a rain garden where all of a sudden we're going to go to construction, we're going to dig up your rain garden. So we have to kind of put those in places where it won't get disturbed in the near future.
Yeah, right now, it feels like a Victorian park to me. It's this grassy, which is, from an ecosystem point of view, it's great for people to run over, but it's dead. And then you have a cottonwood tree, and then you have a whole host of aging pines of various species that are dying over in the Frisbee golf area. They're reaching the end of their natural lifespan, and they're going. And I'm watching the trees they've replaced and wondering how many of them are going to take. And just an awareness that you might see a mink running across the shoreline, which I see pretty frequently. There was an osprey hanging around are people aware of these things? And you could showcase and make an incredible park by choosing native species that are great for absorbing water. Many little touches. And yes, I plan to be there as much as possible. We're in the park almost daily. So
I mean, I think one of the things that we have going for us to date, we've been working with one landscape architect. It's not like every time we do something, we go out with a request for a proposal for a new landscape architect. So we're trying to develop a team that once you get this message to them, they have the skill set to do the things that you're talking about and to bring those, as long as we can do it within budget. But sometimes design doesn't necessarily have to cost more. It just, it's a different approach. So I'm hopeful. We have just put in a consolidated funding application for 2021, seeking $430,000 for architectural and construction documents for the playground and the relocated bathroom concession area. Mostly because that's not necessarily the first thing we wanted to do, but through the state parks EPA, that's the most competitive funding. And they allowed us to look backwards at that programming money that the Emerson Foundation gave us, which is what you saw from those meetings. And the $65,000 that the legislature set aside to do the design we're talking about now for Emerson Park, that was all county money. And we were able to add those two together and say, there's our match. So we're trying to get $430,000 without spending any more money. So I don't know if it'll be successful. I hope it is.
well,
And the
thank you
Emerson
very much.
Foundation has expressed very
No more
strong.
monkey pits, okay?
Yep.
If people don't know what that is, there literally was a pit you looked into that had monkeys in the bottom of it, and it's right where one of those fountains is today, near the pavilion.
And
No.
So everybody, it's almost 8:30. Maybe we should wrap this up.
Steve, thank you very much. Excellent.
Yeah, you're really, Steve, excellent.
always glad to
Yes,
join
thank
you
you.
folks. Thank you for all the work that you are all doing and have continued to do. Honestly, I am blown away, and I don't know where we would be without Aula. So you're all to be absolutely, I got you, all of you on a pedestal.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks,
Appreciate your
Steve.
time.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay.
And we have a great deal of respect for you too, so.
Want to say hello to everybody? Come here, come on, up. There he is. I
A
can't
little, little higher. Oh.
He needs his walk.
Yeah, I gotta go do that with our dog too, so have a
Good night.
good remainder of your evening,
Everybody.
everybody.
Thank you, Steve, very much.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Everybody.
Wonderful.